On the 11th of February, 1990, a man walked out of a prison gate in South Africa. He had spent 27 years in prison, not all in one place, but all inside a system meant to silence him. He had entered as a lawyer, a political leader, and a man who believed in a democratic and free society. Now he was walking into sunlight, into cameras, and into a waiting world. His name was Nelson Mandela. But this story does not begin at the prison gate, and it does not end there either. It begins on a quiet path in the Eastern Cape, where a boy walked through open hills toward a village school. It moves through the crowded streets of Johannesburg, where a young lawyer discovered that the law did not protect everyone equally. It passes through a courtroom, where a man spoke words he believed might be his last. And it continues through decades inside prison walls, through limestone dust, cold floors, and silence. When the gate finally opened, the walk was not finished. This is the story of Nelson Mandela, from prisoner to president, and the long walk that connected them. Chapter 1. A Boy Between Two Worlds. Nelson Mandela was born on the 18th of July, 1918, in a small village called Mvezo, in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His birth name was Rolihlahla Mandela. In the Xhosa language, the name Rolihlahla can be loosely translated as troublemaker. He grew up in a nearby village called Kunu. The landscape was wide and open, green hills, dirt paths, and bright sky. His family belonged to the Thembu people. His father was a local chief and a counselor to the Thembu regent. Young Rolihlahla learned the traditions of his community. He listened to elders speak. He watched how decisions were made in community meetings where everyone had the right to be heard. But his world was already shaped by forces beyond the village. South Africa was shaped by colonial history, white minority rule, and laws that treated people differently because of race. Even in rural areas, these laws reached into everyday life. When Mandela started school, something small but important happened. His teacher gave him a new name, Nelson. This was a common practice in colonial schools across Africa. African children often received English names. It was a quiet moment, but it carried a larger meaning. Colonial education shaped identity. It decided which language, which name, and which knowledge mattered most. Identity means the qualities, beliefs, and experiences that make a person who they are. For Mandela, identity was already being pulled between two different worlds, the traditional world of Thembu community life and the formal world of colonial education. Mandela's father died when Mandela was still a boy. After his father's death, Mandela was taken in by the Thembu regent, Jongintaba Dalindyebo, a leader who governed on behalf of the Thembu royal family. This gave Mandela access to a wider world. He attended better schools. He eventually reached the University of Fort Hare, one of the few universities in South Africa open to black students at that time. But Mandela did not finish his degree at Fort Hare. He left after a dispute connected to student politics. Even then, he was becoming someone who asked difficult questions and who was willing to accept consequences for asking them. Before a person becomes a symbol, he is a child shaped by place, family, and history. Mandela's early years placed him between two worlds. Both would stay with him. Both would matter. The long walk had begun on a village path under open sky, but the path ahead was not yet visible. The boy left the path of childhood and entered a world of cities, laws, and injustice. In Johannesburg, Mandela would learn that the law did not protect everyone equally. Chapter 2. The lawyer who learned the law was not fair. Mandela arrived in Johannesburg as a young man looking for opportunity. What he found instead was a system. That system was called apartheid. Apartheid was a system of racial separation, oppression, and denial of political rights in South Africa. It was not simply a collection of unfair rules. It was a complete structure of control. Apartheid decided where people could live, where they could work, where they could travel, where they could study, and whether they could vote. Black South Africans were denied basic political rights. They were forced to carry passbooks identity documents that restricted their movement. Without the correct passbook, a person could be arrested simply for being in the wrong area. Discrimination means treating people unfairly because of their race, gender, religion, or background. Under apartheid, discrimination was not hidden. It was the law. Mandela studied law. He understood that law is supposed to protect people, but in South Africa, the law was being used to control people. He saw this every day in the courtrooms, in the streets, in the lives of ordinary people who came to him for help. Together with his friend and fellow activist Oliver Tambo, Mandela opened a law firm, Mandela and Tambo. It became one of the few law practices in South Africa that served black clients who had almost no legal protection. They were not simply practicing law. They were standing up for rights inside a system designed to deny those rights. Mandela also joined the African National Congress, the ANCA political movement that had been fighting against racial oppression since 1912. He became part of the ANC Youth League, which pushed for more active resistance. He helped organize the Defiance Campaign of 1952, a campaign of deliberate, non-violent resistance to unjust laws. But the government responded with more control, more restrictions, more force. Activists were watched, banned from public life, and arrested. Walter Sisulu, one of Mandela's closest allies and a senior leader within the ANC, was among those repeatedly targeted. The space for peaceful protest was shrinking. To stand up for rights means to defend what is fair, even when it is difficult. To take a risk means to do something knowing it might cost you. In Johannesburg, Mandela was doing both. The city taught him something the village could not. Law could protect people, but unfair law could also destroy them. And when the law itself became a weapon, challenging it meant putting everything at risk. Mandela tried law. He tried protest. He joined a movement. But the country was becoming more violent, and the government was becoming more forceful. Soon, Mandela would stand in a courtroom, facing charges that could take away his freedom forever. Chapter 3. The Speech That Could Have Been a Goodbye. On the 21st of March, 1960, in a township called Sharpeville, police opened fire on a crowd of unarmed protesters. 69 people were killed. Many were shot while trying to flee. The Sharpeville massacre shocked South Africa and the world. A massacre is the killing of many people, especially people who cannot defend themselves. After Sharpeville, the South African government banned the ANC. The largest political organization fighting for the rights of black South Africans was now illegal. Peaceful protest was being met with state violence. This forced a painful decision. Mandela and other leaders, including Walter Sisulu, concluded that non-violent resistance alone could no longer work against a government willing to shoot unarmed people. In 1961, they helped form Umkhonto we Sizwe, meaning Spear of the Nation. It was the armed wing of the ANC. Its early actions focused on sabotage targeting government infrastructure, not people. Sabotage means deliberately destroying equipment, buildings, or systems, usually for political reasons. This is a complex part of the story, and it must be told carefully. Mandela and others argued that sabotage had become a response to a violent system, a system that had already used force to crush every peaceful option. This decision should not be glorified. But it should not be erased either. It was a choice made under extreme pressure, after years of peaceful efforts had been answered with bullets. In 1962, Mandela was arrested. Then came the Rivonia trial, one of the most important political trials in South African history. Mandela and several others, including Walter Sisulu and Ahmed Kathrada, were accused of sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. They faced the possibility of the death penalty. A trial is a legal process in a court of law where evidence is presented and examined. An accused person is someone formally charged with a crime. On the 20th of April, 1964, Mandela stood in the dock and delivered a statement from the accused. He spoke for over 3 hours. Near the end, he said words that would become some of the most important in modern history. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. He was not calling for attacks on ordinary people. He was explaining why he and others had turned to sabotage against the apartheid system and what he was willing to lose. After the statement came the sentence: not freedom, not victory, life imprisonment. The long walk continued, but now it would happen behind walls. Chapter 4. 27 Years and One Walk. In June of 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. A sentence in law is the punishment given by a court after a trial. Life imprisonment means prison with no fixed date of release. Mandela spent 27 years in prison. He served the majority of those years on Robben Island, a small island off the coast of Cape Town. Later, he was moved to Pollsmoor Prison on the mainland, and finally to Victor Verster Prison, where conditions were less severe. On Robben Island, the conditions were harsh. Prisoners were forced to work in a limestone quarry under bright sun. The constant glare from the white stone damaged Mandela's eyesight over time. Prisoners slept on thin mats on cold cell floors. They were allowed limited visits and limited mail. The rules were strict. The routine was heavy. Routine means a regular pattern of activities repeated every day. But Robben Island also became something the government did not intend. It became a place of study, discussion, and quiet resistance. Political prisoners organized among themselves. They debated strategy, history, economics, and the future of South Africa. They studied. They taught each other. Some prisoners called the island the university. Mandela, Sisulu, Kathrada, and others kept their political purpose alive inside those walls day after day, year after year. To hold on to hope means to continue believing that something better is possible, even when the situation feels impossible. To refuse to surrender means to keep going when everything around you says stop. Outside the prison, the anti-apartheid struggle was carried forward by many hands. Oliver Tambo led the ANC from exile. Desmond Tutu, an Anglican archbishop, became a powerful moral voice against apartheid and received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984. International pressure grew through economic sanctions, cultural boycotts, and political campaigns around the world. The movement against apartheid was not one person. It was millions of people, inside and outside South Africa, refusing to accept the system. Then, in February 1990, South African President F.W. de Klerk made a historic announcement. He unbanned the ANC and other political organizations. He announced that Nelson Mandela would be released. On the 11th of February, 1990, Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison, holding Winnie Mandela's hand, with cameras and crowds waiting outside. He was 71 years old. The world watched. Crowds filled the streets of Cape Town. But Mandela's words that day were not only about joy or forgiveness. He spoke clearly. The struggle was not over. Apartheid had not yet been fully dismantled. The work of building a democratic South Africa was only beginning. The gate had opened. But a country does not become free in a single day. Chapter 5. From Prisoner to President. After Mandela's release, South Africa entered one of the most dangerous and uncertain periods in its history. The apartheid system was ending, but the country was filled with political tension and violence. Political killings continued. Communities clashed. The road to democracy was not smooth. Negotiations between the ANC and the government were difficult and sometimes collapsed entirely. Fear, anger, and deep inequality did not disappear because one man walked free. Mandela worked alongside other leaders, including F.W. de Klerk and ANC negotiators, to build a transition toward democracy. Democracy means a system of government where people choose their leaders through free and fair elections. Building democracy in a country shaped by decades of racial oppression was not simple. It was slow, uncertain, and fragile. Then, on the 27th of April, 1994, South Africa held its first fully democratic election. For the first time in the country's history, South Africans of all races could vote. Millions of people stood in long lines, some waiting for hours, to cast their ballots. A ballot is the paper or method used to record a vote. Those long lines were their own kind of walk patient, quiet, and historic. Mandela's party, the ANC, won the election. On the 10th of May, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the first democratically elected president of South Africa. An inauguration is the formal ceremony where a leader officially takes office. At his inauguration in Pretoria, Mandela addressed the nation and the world. He said, "Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another." But becoming president was not the end. It was the beginning of another long and difficult responsibility. Mandela emphasized reconciliation, trying to rebuild trust between communities divided by decades of injustice. Reconciliation means the process of bringing people together after conflict. It does not mean forgetting what happened. It means facing the past honestly while trying to build a shared future. In 1995, when South Africa hosted the Rugby World Cup, Mandela used the event as a public gesture of unity, but a single symbolic moment could not heal what decades of oppression had broken. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was established to hear testimonies from victims and perpetrators of apartheid-era violence. A testimony is a formal statement about what someone experienced or witnessed. The process was painful. It was imperfect. It was incomplete. But it was an attempt to face the truth rather than bury it. South Africa did not become a healed country in 1994. Inequality, poverty, and division continued long after the election. Freedom arrived, but it arrived as a beginning, not as an ending. Mandela served one term as president and stepped down in 1999. He chose not to hold on to power. That, too, was part of the walk. Final reflection. Nelson Mandela's story is not only the story of one man, it is the story of a movement, the ANC, the activists, the exiled leaders, the prisoners, the voters, the international campaigns, and the ordinary people who refused to accept apartheid. Mandela walked a long path from a village in the Eastern Cape, through the streets of Johannesburg, into a courtroom, through 27 years of prison walls, out of a gate, through a voting line, and toward a presidency no one had thought possible. But the walk did not end at the inauguration. The real test of freedom is not what a person or a nation survives. It is what they choose to build afterwards. South Africa is still walking. The country still carries the weight of its history. Inequality, poverty, and unfinished healing. Freedom arrived, but it arrived with responsibility. This is why Mandela's story is not only about success. It is about patience, discipline, and what people choose to build after pain. Mandela died on the 5th of December, 2013, at the age of 95. The walk continues without him. The direction was set. The distance was not. What does freedom mean after 27 years in prison? Perhaps it means this. Freedom was not the end of the walk. It was the beginning of responsibility.